Hello, welcome again to another rendition of the Tom and John Show. I hope those of you that have joined us live have enjoyed that aspect, and those of you that have watched us on YouTube, thanks for doing that as well. Today we have Mike Kenna from the USGA as our guest, and he's going to share a whole wide spectrum of information pertaining to the USGA, its activities, and how things have advanced over the years. So I'll pass it off to John, and he will proceed with the introduction.
Thanks, Tom, for the introduction, and Mike for joining us. I appreciate it. I will give no focus on my screens. There we go. I'm going to give a brief introduction. I want to thank you for being here. I know that you've been with the USGA for quite a while and pretty influential in terms of the research that happens at the university level and across the country as it relates to turfgrass research. But I'll give you some background on you. El Cajon.
El Cajon.
El Cajon. I want to say Cajones. El Cajon, California. So that's where you grew up, and you went to Cal Poly Pomona and got your Bachelor of Science degree in ornamental horticulture. And then I don't know what exactly pulled you out to Oklahoma State. I'm curious to hear that. But you went there and you got a master's in agronomy and a PhD in crop science. And after you finished, you then went to work with Milt Engelke at Texas A&M as his research associate. And I know that you were really into breeding and population genetics, and so that was probably a big push to get there. And you were there for 5 years, but then ultimately you went to the USGA and in 1990, I believe. So, and without dating you, it's been 26 years. Congratulations on your 25-year anniversary. And you started there in the same position you are now, which is director of the USGA Green Section Research Program, which really for us as researchers, that's what we rely on pretty heavily for funding for our graduate students and research projects that we're working on. And so thank you for that, and that's been pretty critical, I think, for many turfgrass scientists around the country. So that's a 30,000-foot overview, but why don't you give us a little bit more background on kind of how you started and came to where you are now?
Well, I think many of the researchers probably worked on golf courses when they were kids. So I started working on a golf course when I was 16 years old, and started out at UC San Diego and was in biochemistry. I was going to go into the pre-med program. Unfortunately, I was only a B student, so the superintendent I worked for, Dave Fleming, he was at Singing Hills. That's where I worked when I was in high school, and I don't know, it's just one of those things. I was a little frustrated. He'd always ask me how school was going, and one day I said, I think I'm going to have to do something else. And he said, well, have you ever thought about being a golf course superintendent? And I told him, I said, I didn't even know you had to go to school for that. So anyway, he talked to me about going to Cal Poly Pomona, and I went up there, met with Kent Kurtz, and that's how I got involved in horticulture. And the goal was to become a golf course superintendent. But at that time, Kent Kurtz was working on his PhD with Bob Kneebone at University of Arizona. He was working in heat tolerance with bent grass. And so I did a lot of the lab work for that, and got very interested in it. I did some work with zoysia grass looking at iron chlorosis problems with Vic Youngner out at UC Riverside. And I was doing this all as a graduate student, so when I finished up, they both thought it would be a good idea if I went to graduate school. So they set everything up, and I literally drove out to Oklahoma State. I think I signed a few papers, and the next thing you know, I was in graduate school. And the funny thing about it is, I was in school with my master's in agronomy and PhD in crop science, very interested in plant breeding. Went to school for 5 years and had $10,000 in the bank. So it's kind of, I don't think that happens too much to graduate students anymore. It was back in the days. If for those of you that remember the gas lines of the 1970s, it made a lot of sense to go to a state where they were pumping oil out of the ground. So everything was free. It was basically free education. So after that, it was kind of interesting. This was that transition where plant breeding positions in the early 80s were being taken over by molecular breeding positions. And so positions like Vic Younger at UC Riverside and Bob Nebo at University of Arizona, those were two plant breeding programs that I was really interested in pursuing to work on warm season grasses. Well, Vic Younger passed away suddenly in 1984. And as I told you earlier, John, when I graduated, I thought I would go out and work on the USGA's oceangrass breeding program at UC Riverside and kind of work into that breeding position. Well, he passed away. I drove out to meet with Vic Younger to find out what they were going to do with that particular USGA project. And Vic said they moved it to Texas A&M with a new grass breeder named Milt Dinkelkey. So I turned around and drove from California to Dallas. Met with Milt and basically kind of begged him to hire me, and he did for a whopping $16,000 a year as his research assistant on that. We called it a postdoc position. I did that till I started August of August of '84, and did that until November of '85, and I got hired back at Oklahoma State University. I think one of the reasons why was my interest in plant breeding, and then Charles Talaferro was my major advisor when I was at Oklahoma State, and we kind of had grand designs about doing Bermuda grass breeding at that time. So did that till 1990. I started with the USGA February of 1990, and there's kind of an interesting story with that too. As a young faculty member, you come up for promotion and tenure. And at that time, Oklahoma was still kind of recovering from, the drop in oil prices. It's kind of just like it is now. It's funny how things cycle. But at any rate, I had got my tenure package, was up for promotion. Everything was just great. It was approved by the dean. Everything was just going along. And I thought, well, okay, this is my chance to get a nice, increase in salary. I went to talk to the department head, and he says, there's just no money for salary programs. And I said, look, I've been working for 5 years now. Doug Breedy was here when I started in '85, and he left at the end of '86. So I had the research, extension, and teaching. I did all three for a year and a half until we hired his replacement. And so not to get a raise at that point in time was really kind of devastating. So I said, what do I need to do? And this was in December of '89. And he said, well, you need to go out and get another job offer. Well, I was on the USGA research committee as the young scientist at that time, and I knew that there were two USGA agronomist positions. There was one with John Foy down in Florida, and one with Jim Latham up in the North Central. So I called up Bill Benjafield and I said, hey, I'd like to apply. Well, he was totally surprised, and I went ahead and interviewed the first week of January, and I got the position before I left to go work with John Foy in Florida. Well, about 2 weeks later, Bill Benjafield resigned, and Jim Snow became the national director. And I'll never forget this. I did a little seminar. If I could get 5 or 6 football and baseball coaches together in some of our K through 12 schools that we have here in Oklahoma, I would go down there and spend a day with them and show them, what they could do on their football fields and their baseball fields and that sort of thing. So I'm in Weoka, Oklahoma, which is a K through 12 school, and the secretary for the high school, well, for this, it's K through 12, it's all the grades. She says, you have an important call from the USGA. And, at this point, I know I'm going to go to Florida, work for John Foy. It's Jim Snow on the line. And so I start talking to him, and he says, well, as you know, I'm going to be the national director, and, it's kind of like a golf course superintendent. When you go in, you want to hire a good assistant, and he offered me the job to be the research director right there. And here's the irony is that I hadn't even shown up for work. I already increased my salary, and I got a $10,000 increase because I was going from an agronomist to a director level. I hadn't even shown up to work, and I already got a raise.
So you didn't even give Oklahoma a chance. You were like, this is way too good. I'm out of
This
here.
was way too good.
Good for you.
Yeah, they did. They countered, but they were a little bit below what the USGA was offering at that time.
Yeah, that's good though. Was this the first time that they had that position created? Is this a new position that they created?
You'd have to go back to Fred Grau in 1946 somebody that's works for the USGA and is directing a research program. Prior to that, prior to 1946, the USGA research program was actually a grant program to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So from 1921 to the end of World War II, the USGA basically funded the U.S. Department of Agriculture to do the agronomic research for the USGA.
Gotcha. You take over, and now all of a sudden you're starting this kind of it kind of is a new position, and you've got to kind of figure out what you want to do with it. Why don't you talk a little bit about what exactly the Green Section program does? Obviously, Tom and I know pretty well what it does, but there might be a lot of people watching that have no clue of exactly the contributions that you make to research and really the goal of the Green Section research program.
Well, for several years we always used, using science to benefit the game of golf, and I think that's I've always thought of that as kind of the basic theme of what the USGA Green Section Research Program does. There's always so much going on in plant science, and so this research program has really, over the years, has had the opportunity to work with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, but more recently, a lot more with our land-grant universities, to investigate anything that's new and interesting, and using the scientific method to find out whether that really works or not. And that by far is kind of the basis. But then you start thinking about what direction we go. Well, a big push over the years has been resource management, conservation of resources, and that kind of evolved. We actually started using the term sustainability back in the mid '90s. Because we saw over time that there was going to be limitations on various resources. The first and foremost was water. And growing up in Southern California in the late '70s, we actually had gone through a very severe drought. So that was one of the reasons why the USGA invigorated the research program back in the early '80s, was because of not only the droughts in California, but there was a severe drought in the mid-Atlantic area too. So that kind of set the theme to start looking at resource conservation. And so we kind of did that in a couple of different ways. One of them was to start looking at how much water turfgrasses use. There was really not that much information on just general water use rates, and so there was a lot of work done by Dr. Jim Beard, Dr. Caro did a lot of that work, Bob Sherman. I mean, there was just a whole group at that time that were looking at water use in turf grasses. And then in the plant breeding area, we went and started working again with Rutgers, Dr. Burton down at University of Georgia. New programs were being brought in line in the early '80s. The research program with Engelkey at Texas A&M, Taliaferro at Oklahoma State. And then we went back to a couple of others that were kind of interesting. Dr. Scogli up at University of Rhode Island, we funded him a little bit. Bob Kneebone down at Arizona was getting some money. And the idea there was to, hey, take what you have and let's start pushing some of these cultivars out there. Of course, then Dr. Deutsch at Penn State, he had a USGA grant at that time, and I think I know I used to claim PSU 126. I think that was Penn Eagle. That was one of the cultivars that actually shows up in our reports back in the early '80s that we were funding that. So it was Penn. Which one was that? I thought it was Penn Eagle, but anyway.
It was Penn Eagle followed by Penlands.
Way before my time.
You should know that now.
I should know that, yeah.
So anyway, I could ramble on but that's one of the areas. And then the other area too that in the early '90s is that we had the program with Audubon International. So we were looking at how golf courses could be beneficial to wildlife habitat. A push for that direction was it was a lot of environmental groups thought it was bad to build a golf course because it was going to be a dead zone for wildlife, and if they were cutting down trees or changing the environment in many ways. So there was always a push towards doing that type of work. And then we got into some of the areas about what happens to pesticides and fertilizers to golf courses. That was a big issue in the '90s, and so we did a lot of work looking at the fate and transport of pesticides and fertilizers. And Dr. Watchke did some of that work early on at Penn State. I have some of those old slides too, Tom, of you and Dr. Kimberly Arusha, both looking, at the plots, looking at some of the, you had some lysimeters in there, and believe me, they're probably blackmail shots in the long run from my new boss. So, so that was, we did all that type of work, and today it's funny. It's the reason why I went to graduate school was to develop warm season grasses for Southern California to deal with drought issues. Here it is, 30 odd years later, and one of the projects that we're working on is to try to improve color retention in warm season grasses so that we can start using more Bermuda grass, zoysia grass in the desert Southwest, and try to reduce the amount of overseeding just to conserve some water during the winter months. See if we can give them good green color without having to overseed. We think that would be a big advantage for them from a water use standpoint. And we have a new project that we're working with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, their Forage and Range Research Laboratory in Logan, Utah. That group of scientists have collected grasses from all over the world to work in the Intermountain. Their target is grasses that can survive at about 18 to 20 inches or less every year without any irrigation. So we're investing in that program to work with them to go beyond just working in the forage and range, but also start working for turf grasses, primarily for out-of-play areas and rough areas in that whole western area of the United States. So there's always something going on.
Well, you mentioned breeding a lot, and there are a lot of projects, but there's a lot of other projects and stuff.
Oh yeah, there's lots of projects.
You funded the work that I did on Bentgrass Dead Spot. I always say that we did such a good job that you never see it anymore. So thanks to the USGA for the funding on that. So you do a ton of projects. You've got the breeding, you've got cultivar selection, and things like water conservation and management, disease and pests, and all kinds of stuff. We talked a little bit about it, but tell me, how do you assess the impact of that, or what do you think the impact of that research has been in terms of managing golf courses?
Well, that's something that we're just starting to work on. I have some different things that we've talked about, and if I can, I'll show that couple of those PowerPoint slides that I had. If I can find them on my computer now. Is it right there? Yeah. Okay.
If you hover over your screen and click on the green box with the arrow through it, that should
get
your.
There it is.
And just share the screen that it's going to show up on when you go live with it.
Is it sharing? No, it's not sharing. Okay, so.
Now, I don't know what monitor you have it on, but if you go.
There, okay.
Yeah, that's it.
Come up.
You're up.
All right. Okay, I'm not gonna. I'm just gonna show it this way. I'm not gonna put it in the full view. Well, I guess I can do that. Let's see.
if it works. It works. Yeah, that's good. We see
Is that good?
That's perfect.
Okay. I was telling John earlier that we got the idea that we thought, well, maybe it'd be interesting to get the tri-societies to open access all the turfgrass research. And I can't remember the total number of articles, but at the time, what the tri-societies wanted was $650,000. We could have open access to every turfgrass article that going all the way back to the 1920s. Let me escape here.
You said that number, and I just don't get it. I mean, aren't these articles, after some period of time, able to be shared outside of crop
I think
science?
so, but apparently not. I thought maybe like after 1950 everything would be free, but it just didn't work out that way.
Yeah, I'm sure they'd yell at me. I'd take all my PDFs and put them up on our website and have them downloadable.
I think what we would do is, at this point, is maybe just go back and whatever the USGA funded, we might do that. That would be fewer. And then going forward, make everything that we fund open access. Because a lot of times people want that article and they can't get it because they're not a member of ASA, Crop Science, and Soil Science Society of America. But anyway, what I did was, after I knew the number, this is the blue line here is the average grants per decade. So you can see back in the 1920s, most of the grants were going with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and that was pretty much the case all the way through the 20s, the 30s, and the 40s. So, as I said earlier, Dr. Fred Grau had worked as a USDA employee for the green section, and at this particular time he came back after World War II and was hired to work for the USGA, and it became an internal program. The green section became an internal program at that point in time. Now, if I move my mouse, can they see that?
Yes.
Okay. So we're at this point in time, and through the 50s, one of the things that Dr. Grau did while he was with the USGA, and this is before he went to Penn State, he saw that. Let me do something here. Let me click to the next slide. Okay. This is the one here. Now that what I've added is you've got the average number of journal articles per year per decade. So I think there were an average of 2 articles per year during the 1920s. There was an average of 6 articles per year in the 30s, an average of 14 articles per year. You kind of see the trend. And it was right about this time here when Dr. Grau, he saw a need for the USGA to do more work going out and doing extension work with golf courses. So he started, again, it was called the Turf Agronomy Service at that time. Now it's called the Course Consulting Service. And essentially what happened was some of the money started going in support of research at universities. So it's not a lot of funding, but you can see there's kind of a jump here in the 60s and the 70s, and I think that's partially because the USGA started small grants. I think they were like about $3,000 to $5,000 a year. It wasn't a lot of money. But the other thing too that happened during that time is this is when we started having more turfgrass scientists at the universities. And it's kind of like this period of time where Dr. Beard is very active. A lot of his graduate students are moving out into the different land-grant universities. So we see this increase in research. I still would say that particular time was probably more the effect of state and federal funding that was there. And then we hit the 80s, and I've got an overlay here. We hit the 80s, and this is when the USGA really started putting money into land-grant university research. So you can see our average grants per year is going way up. The number of projects per year were going up, and you can see the number of journal articles per decade is going up. And then we hit 2008, and our funding basically gets cut in half, and then we only had a third, about 500,000. We averaged through that, and then you can see how I don't know. I just think that's part of the reason why we see some of this drop is that we're not putting as much into research. And there's probably the same cuts with the local turfgrass associations, the golf course superintendents. You know, if researchers don't have the money to do quality research, you know, journal quality research, then you're going to see the publications go down. And I've tried to make this case that this is why we need to, you know, fund research. You can just see.
I look at that number and it's crazy to me because your funding, which doesn't allow for equipment or faculty salaries or anything, we put that towards graduate students, and graduate students are the ones that are going to do, you know, and be in the field doing the research. So for every graduate student I have, for a master's, you expect 2 publications, and for a PhD, you expect 3 or more publications. And so in a period of 2 years for a master's student, if I don't have funding for that, well, there's 2 publications out of 1 lab.
Right.
And so that's huge. And I think that number, while I agree with you, it does probably trend along with the local associations. It shows a huge impact of lack of funding in terms of what's being produced out there. So it's a good slide.
Yeah, and we struggle with increasing the grant funds to support a graduate student. You know, when I started, it seemed like if we could come up with 20 to 25,000 a year, that was about the right amount to. You might not pay everything, but at least you could get a graduate student in the door. Some of the schools, I don't know what it is at Penn State. I know Cornell, it's approaching 50,000 a year to have a graduate student.
Yeah, we're about 45 right now.
You know, so and this is what we struggle with is, you know, we have about a little bit over $1 million a year in the competitive grants program that's available. So, and that's cycling. So we try to put up about 350,000 each year of new grants. Well, if everybody gets a $30,000 grant, you know, you're only looking at 10 new projects a year. So even in our current scenario, if we don't increase our budget, we're only going to have so many new projects every year. And if we do increase our budget, then I really think it's to increase the size of the grants. But we're adding about 10 to 15 new projects a year. We have anywhere from I'd say we kind of peak out usually around 75. An average number would be about 60.
So what, for any academics that are watching this, including me, how do you see, so we know that there's limited funding, and that's fine, that's the way it's going to be. I'm glad that you guys are continuing to fund programs as it is, because like I said, it really does make all the impact in terms of funding graduate students. Even if it's $25,000 and then the overhead, you know, that at least allows me to go to my department and say, hey, I have a match. Like, can you put up the other, because the USGA is supporting this. But what do you see, I'll transition now, what do you see as the USGA's driving factors moving forward in terms of promoting, you know, research? And I don't know what direction that's going to be. Is it environmental stewardship? Is it improving other aspects of the game of golf? Is it really back to more breeding? Which as a non-breeder, it seems like we have a lot of breeding projects.
There's not that many, really.
Breeder, I'm sure that it's important, but so I'm curious as to where you think the future is going to go with it.
I think something that's of interest, I think, to the USGA right now, again, is this resource management. And I think I went ahead and put this slide up there. This is some work that Dr. Dale Bremer did out at Kansas State University. If you know, using these unmanned aerial systems for golf courses, I think the technology is finally catching up to making this a valuable tool to you know, give golf course superintendents the term that we used years ago, a synoptic view of what's going on the golf course. Whether it's water management, disease management, fertility management, there's just a whole range of things that I think that this technology will be able to help us out with. And essentially, what's going on? I mean, just going out, they're able to fly over the golf course. A lot of these, whether they're the quadcopters or they even have the small winged aircraft that they can. Just talking to a guy the other day, he can do this. He can fly over a golf course in 30 minutes, and they're working with a company that can basically stitch together all the photographs and everything and have that done the following day. And so rather than looking at something that looks fairly healthy, you can start looking at how the turfgrass is responding. And what we're trying to do is, if we set up some type of trial, whether it's this one here is an irrigation trial, whether it's a fertility trial, disease trial, anything like that, is if we can start getting these NDVI or thermal type imaging of the plots, it starts showing us, where do you start seeing that stress level. And in this particular one, you can see here's they have different replacement amounts of ET. So here's 100% replacement, 80%, and 65%, and this is on a bent grass fairway. Well, when you get to 50%, you're starting to get turf that's less actively growing, and it's really measuring active biomass in this area. And then you go down to 30% and 15%. So you can see how, I mean, just a tool like this, if you were to take the combination of this, good estimates of ET, we're working with the USGA and some others to use some of the satellite remote sensing that gives you an estimated daily ET and a weekly ET. Taking your weather station information, maybe having some soil sensors, and flying over your golf course about every other week. I think we could really make some inroads in significant water conservation, not just in the areas like California and where they, in some respects, they're in a drought every year because they get less than 18 inches of rain. But what about other parts of the country where they have plenty of water, but maybe they're not really managing it the best way that they can? And I would say probably if I had to pick an issue, this water management using this kind of technology is probably something that's, we're very interested to see how we can do this. And we'd like to see universities across different regions cooperate with each other, to use this technology to show that if we use the weather stations, the satellites, the UASs, that we could have a 20 to 25% reduction in water use. And that would be something that I think applying for specialty crop research initiative funding, grants to the USGA. I just think that this is something that kind of gets me excited. I mean, I see the application of this, and I think you've actually done a little bit of this too, haven't you?
Yeah, we've started looking at some of it. Kind of on two fronts. I have it here as part of we have a playability plant health study that we're looking at, more like tournament preparation stuff. So it's really how do we manage without overdoing it for playability on those short period, 2-week preparation for a tournament. But we've been looking at the thermal imaging, and obviously NDVI has been around a long time, and not so much from research, but from an outside standpoint. I'm also working with GreenSight, who's doing a lot of this, really at the forefront of the innovation of this to try and bring it to golf courses. And like you said, the ability to fly a course at any given time on a day, plan, spit that information out, and provide alerts to golf course superintendents, whether it be moisture or whatever, that to me is huge information. The biggest challenge I see moving forward from this is the interpretation of that data, and it's big data, right? So you've got all this data, but you can't give that to the superintendent or to anyone. No. They have to have hey, this is at a critical point, you need to turn the irrigation on, or you need to input this into your sprayer, and our GPS units will just drive it wherever you need to, and it'll hit the areas automatically. Like that, to me, would be kind of the ultimate integration of all this stuff. But
it's I think the term that that's been used for years is the ground truthing of what these images and what these pictures can give you. What do they mean? And that's why I thought if if you're putting out a fungicide trial or you're putting out a cultivar trial, anything that we do, if we can document it using this kind of technology, it starts giving you some meaning to, you know, what these images are. I mean, if you have somebody that's ground truthing by evaluating, let's say, an NTEP trial, and you know, you have this image and it's, you know, it's correlating that, you know, the grasses that look good out there are, you know, maybe some of the other ones, they look good, but maybe they don't look as good as, you know, something else, because the NDVI is giving you just that little bit of extra information. You know, another thing that, you know, we're working with NTEP this year, this concept of using rainout shelters to, you know, even in areas where you have, you know, lots of precipitation each year, to actually put grasses in drought stress, you know, figure out what, you know, which ones can go longer without irrigation, do something along the lines of summing up the amount of water that they need to get through a growing season. So, you know, maybe, I know with the work that Dale Bremer did, he, you know, for a 100-day period, he had some of these Kentucky bluegrasses that used 4 to 5 inches of water less than some of the higher water use ones. So I think this is something that we're very interested in. Is, you know, if you think of in terms of like fuel efficiency in cars, we want water efficiency in turfgrass. So that study's underway. You know, Kevin Morris is organizing that, and we'll have about 10 sites around the country that will start evaluating grasses under drought conditions. So when there is a drought, we have things that do better, or we have, let's say, rough that you don't have to irrigate at all. It just grows on the natural precipitation in that area, and you don't have to irrigate it.
I think it's going to take a combined effort from not only breeding but kind of the technology to interpret some of that stuff. You know, kind of like what you said, you have to be able to make a decision based on something. I should water it because it looks bad or something like that.
Yeah, and I think that's where the you know, more of the management end of it. I mean, the breeders can come up with lots of things to test, but there's all those management issues. How do you manage it more efficiently so that you're using less water, less fertilizer, and yet it still provides you know, something that you know, we're interested in how it relates to golf, but you know, how would it work in a roadside or a home lawn or those kinds of situations also. You know, we always feel like anything we learn that benefits golf, it seems like some other aspect of the turfgrass industry is going to benefit. You know, you develop cold hardy Bermuda grasses for golf course fairways, and the next thing you know, they're being used on football and baseball fields farther to the north, and you know, that's been you know, like FedEx Field, Washington Redskins, their field is a cold hardy Bermuda, and I think the Tennessee Titans. So you see how it kind of transfers to other areas. So I think that's, yeah, you know, something else. I don't know whether I don't know. Really, since about 2000, I've made annual and biannual visits to Washington, D.C., along with Kevin Morris and some others, to tell the story to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, but also congressional and Senate leaders about the role turfgrasses play. And I think one of the benefits of that is that we've really pushed hard with the Specialty Crop Research Initiative. We've tried to explain the importance of turfgrass, and we've had some really, I think, some successes. If you think of, you know, turfgrass scientists competing for NSF or other, you know, kind of federal funding through the USDA, it's very difficult. The competition is pretty stiff, but to this point, turfgrass researchers have received $9 million from Specialty Crop Research Initiative, and And I know a lot of it's in the plant breeding area, but that's kind of the low-hanging fruit to have, improvements in, the plant material that we're working with. And then I think, some of these other things that we've talked about. Okay, how do you manage these to really show that they can get by on less water? So the two biggest projects are the fine fescue work with Rutgers, University of Minnesota, and University of Wisconsin, and then the Southern Warm Season Grass one is a regional grant with NC State, University of Florida, University of Georgia, Texas A&M, and Oklahoma State University. And those two projects over the last 10 years have received $9 million. So it just kind of shows there's this resource management area, I think, is something that in the Specialty Crop Research Initiative area, they're interested in those kinds of projects.
So your bottom line is there's money out there and research done, but you got to be able to find it and have the right.
Got to be able to find it and
work on things that are topical. Yes,
and we talked about sustainability, and I think that's one of their areas. Is how do you, they're thinking, specialty crop is mainly fruit and nut crops, vegetable crops, things like that, but believe me, we go and let them know that there's a turfgrass industry out there that's $50–60 billion a year, so they can't look the other way. They have to support some research in this area. And there again, I think the water conservation area, host plant resistance, management practices that just give you a good product but have fewer resources. I think those are all viable.
Yeah, it has my head spinning because there's so many aspects of it besides like one specific topic, which is what happens when you get these small projects. You focus on one little area of it, but if you're looking at a consortium of people, you're really looking at a holistic approach that involves quite a lot of pulling together of ideas and resources, and ensuring that there's not a lot of overlap in terms of what's being researched out there.
Here's another little story here that, in the 1980s, I know from some of the work we did here at OSU, oh gosh, Jack Fry, Tony Koski, some of these, they were all working with TDRs at the time. And this particular picture, this is actually after I was working with the USGA with Bob Caro down at Georgia. He's got TDRs in these particular plots were Bermuda grass and zoysia grass. He's looking at their water use rates at 3, 6, 9 inches, and I always think it's interesting that now you take that technology and now you have these various TDRs that are moving into industry, and a story about the Spectrum that's kind of interesting is Mike Thoreau with Spectrum. He came here to Stillwater, and it was just a chance meeting. The faculty over there said, "Hey, Mike, why don't you come over and see what he has to offer?" And he brought the pogo stick, the Spectrum there that's in the picture. And I looked at it and I thought, this would really be something that maybe we could use during our U.S. Opens, because the True Firm was coming in at that time, and we were trying to look at this relationship between soil moisture and surface hardness or firmness. And so, the research program, we usually have a little bit of mad money, so I bought some of these, and I gave one to Pat Gross and a couple of other agronomists, and they started using it. It didn't work too well as far as the surface firmness, but man, they just thought this was the greatest thing because they could get the guys to syringe the way they wanted to. They could have them syringe, check the soil moisture, if they were going to irrigate. And so the following year we bought these for all of our agronomists, and here's the interesting impact of this whole thing. I mean, I knew these were going to work. We went all the way back to the 80s where we were using TDR technology. And I know these aren't the most accurate. I think there's the Pogo that's out there that's good. Rainbird and Toro have TDRs. But the thing that was interesting is with this particular company, turf was about 5% of their market. I mean, they were mainly doing agriculture. Now turf is 30%. 30% of the products go to primarily golf course superintendents and sports turf managers.
You you negotiate a cut of that while you.
I keep telling him. I said, you know, he comes by the booth every year and he says, "I owe you a steak dinner." I still haven't gotten that steak dinner.
Anyway, I think that it's a lot that's been presented here, and that I think the clear thing to me, and maybe you can unshare your screen so we can see, but
okay.
The clear thing to me is that there's no doubt that research dollars, funds, whether it's from the USGA or others, and that graph you showed, which highlights publications and based on research dollars, it obviously drives what we do, because we can't do it without the funding. But it also looks like they're saying technology is going to be, things that are around in the 80s that people were doing is now, chump change, and every golf course superintendent has one. And maybe the drones and the NDVI and thermal imaging and that type of stuff, maybe the same thing will happen to that in 10 or 15 years. It'll just become more affordable. It's a totally different discussion, and we talked about it in one of our previous chats, but the technology right now is too expensive, but as labor increases and other costs increase, all of a sudden the technology doesn't seem like such a big hit to your budget, because other things are going up, and the technology always drops. It doesn't continue to rise. The initial data users are going to be expensive, but after that it kind of drops down. So anyway, I don't want to continue and beat up the subject too much, but I do want to thank you for coming, and I want to kind of give everybody a last chance to say anything that they want to say, or address any topics we may not have hit. Tom, do you have anything that you wanted to mention?
Well, yes, Mike, thanks. Information valuable to a broad spectrum of people, and I think the highlight that comes away from it is, where in a research program in turfgrass science in this day and age are you going to find money? And it's not going to be in one place. There's no pot of gold out there. There's no silver bullet. What we have to do is we have to fund.
We're breaking up there.
Sorry.
It's all right.
$50,000 for a graduate student. I mean, that's just. When I had graduate students, it was $15,000. So, I encourage everybody to do the best they can with what's out there. I know when we did our first runoff work, I took a flyer on the federal government through the Department of Interior to get some funds to assist in that program, and lo and behold, it came through. Paid for $1,000 worth of analytical work. You never know. You just have to keep looking. Yeah. But anyway, thanks, Mike.
Yep. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, Tom. It's trying to be creative in how we find our funding, and it's harder and harder. At least the USGA caps the amount of money that the university can take. But right now, Mike, our university's up to, I think, 54%.
Yeah.
Wow. Luckily, the USGA caps it at 16%.
16%.
Can't have it. Yeah. So, Mike, I'll give you the final word. Is there anything that you want to promote or talk about or mention that anybody should be on the lookout for? I know that the call for proposals for new research, we're a little behind that because the deadline was last week.
Yeah, it was Friday, July 1st. But we still have grant-made funds out there. I mean, if there's any researchers that we look at that as kind of seed money to try an idea. Maybe you have a graduate student that has an idea that you want to try, or that's we usually have anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000. Those are just little $3,000 grants, but it's surprising how many of those over the years kind of go from a grant and aid to a couple of years later it's a full-blown project. So that's still available. To the golf course superintendents out there listening in, I used to give this talk, and sometime during the middle of the talk I would always say, I really do feel sometimes we're working on problems that you don't realize you have yet. And I'm very concerned about this whole resource management area. I think it's something that the USGA is putting a lot of time and effort in it. We're not only doing research, but we're trying to develop tools that really help you have better information about what you're putting into your golf course every year. And as the saying goes, you can't manage what you don't measure. And that's one of the things that we're really starting to try to figure out is how do we measure what we're doing accurately and be able to come up with ways to provide a good quality playing surface, but maybe do it with fewer inputs. So with that, John, I don't think there's a whole lot else.
No, I think it was good. I think that some of the slides you showed kind of put it into perspective, and the direction that the USGA is going. It shows a lot of the innovation going back from the beginning and how that ultimately translated. And I think what you mentioned, sometimes we're solving problems they don't realize that they have, is a good point. So I'll wrap it up with that. I do want to mention that our next episode will be July 25th with Dr. Kearns from NC State University. He'll be with us. I don't know what he'll be talking about. Probably something related to stinky hot conditions in North Carolina. But with that, I'm going to wrap it up. I want to thank you again, Tom. Thanks for being here. Mike, obviously, thanks for joining. And look forward to seeing what USGA has to say in the next few years in terms of where funding is going.
All right. Well, very good. Well, thank you for having me.